My name is Tim Freke. I became a philosopher because I'm passionately curious about this mystery we call life. Today I'm on the Isle of Man to talk at the Mindful Man Festival, and I'm taking this opportunity to have a conversation with Steve Taylor, who's also speaking here. Steve is an author and academic who studies transpersonal psychology, with a particular interest in the relationship between science and spirituality. So Steve, we're on the Isle of Man together.
Mm-hmm.
We've both been speaking at the Mindful Man Festival, and it's great to have the opportunity to have some of your time. And what this series I'm launching is really about is having the chance to ask a question underneath the fact that you've written books, you've given great thought into the area, you're an academic. But I want to start our conversation with something which is just human, something which applies to you and me as two people making this journey, some family men,
Mm-hmm.
having lived a life. When you wake up in the morning, what is this, do you think, that we're in? What is this experience we're having? And is there something we should be doing with it for you?
Right, wow. Well, it's a glorious experience. Every day I'm kind of knocked out by the wonder of the world and the beauty of nature and the kind of expansiveness of the space around us that we occupy. And for me, I do feel like there is something kind of propelling me through this world, or propelling or impelling the work that I do. A kind of a creative impulse, an impulse to express something that's deep inside me. And I think I've been trying to do that probably all my life, certainly all my adult life. I've been trying to bring something into existence, to express the certain insights, and it's partly an altruistic urge. I feel an altruistic urge to make a contribution to the human race in some way, to help other human beings to expand themselves and to fulfill their potential.
Yeah, I have exactly the same thing. And it's interesting that your first response to the question was to go to creativity, I guess. There was recently I was talking to somebody who's talking about Alfred North Whitehead, who's a philosopher I kind of found interesting but a little impenetrable, and I became aware, researching him, of this, that he had invented the word creativity, which I found.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he'd done it to describe the very thing you're talking about. And now, of course, we use it for everything. But that sense that there was something inherent to the nature of the universe, which was creative, which we experience. That kind of desire to express something, you said, deep inside you. And I get exactly that. As if there's something inherent about what we're in, that it's creative.
Yeah. Well, the whole universe is a creation, isn't it? Not necessarily by a deity, or not by a deity as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But it's a process of creation. It's a slow development, a slow forming of consciousness, a slow development of consciousness, new life forms coming into being. And we live that process in our lives, don't we? We create the universe. We expand the process of creation through our own lives.
So, for you, is that so? There's two things that you said, both of which are very dear to my heart. One was that sense of creativity, which is, I know from when we were talking previously that you're a musician. I was a musician. There's that sort of push to create in that way, which is there, and then that. What you call it, altruism, or there's that kind of compassion, that desire to contribute, which is very linked to the creativity in some way, and which, I don't know, it feels it's the only thing which really brings meaning, ultimately.
Yeah, and I think the really interesting thing about it is that it's unconscious. I don't feel as though it's coming from me. It's something beyond me that's kind of coming through me. Maybe you feel the same, and my job is to express whatever that is.
Yeah, that's why I think that's why I picked up on went to the Whitehead, and this idea of creativity being, I mean, the word I often use is potentiality. So one of the ideas which I was sharing yesterday was this idea of that the whole universe can be seen as the realization of potentiality. There's another way of using Whitehead's creativity, really, that what we're experiencing is we're part of that, and that when you the more awake you become, or the more conscious you are, the more there's that feeling of I want to express this creativity. I don't think it necessarily has to be, say, like it. Probably you and I may be similar in that we've both been musicians and ended up being writers, and I don't think everyone has to do that. It doesn't. No. But there's still something creative. I see it, in my mum, who was not like that at all. No. But she lived a creative life in that she was contributing by the way she lived.
Yeah, it's something dynamic. I like the word dynamism. There's a certain dynamic process, and I think life becomes most fulfilling when our lives also become dynamic. Not in the sense of being energetic, but in the sense.
What do you mean?
Well, in the sense of growing and moving towards, in the sense of not being static, if you like. I think some of human beings' biggest problems arise when our lives become completely static, when the urge for growth, the dynamic urge for development is frustrated.
Okay.
So if you, a lot of people work in jobs which are not particularly fulfilling, which are based on repeating the same tasks day after day. So there's no sense of dynamicness, dynamism in their lives. The urge for growth is being frustrated.
Yeah.
So I think just like all life forms have this urge for further development, for expansion.
So one of the philosophical ideas that's been really important to me over this last period is looking at the nature of time and going, look, it seems to me that what has happened is always implicit in the moment. Everything that's ever happened is implicit in the moment, and in that way time hasn't gone anywhere. And sometimes I make up a lot of words just to help myself think, because when there's not something which describes what I'm trying to think, then I make up a word just for myself to think with. And the word that I started playing with was the idea of something I call passivity, which is the weight having some sort of having a weight like a metaphor of gravity. So it's what I'm essentially trying to play with is something quite similar, I think, to Rupert Sheldrake and other people like that who've gone. There's a repetition that is linked to the past. The past is, everything is staying the same, thank goodness, because it's repeating the past, and that's a good thing. But it's also a limit. And that there's a kind of dynamic, a duality or a polarity in every moment between something creative and something repetitive. The past, which must be the way it is, and then this potential, this creativity that could be anything. And this moment's that too. Yeah. And it's happening on all these levels, so that the table's on quite a repetitive level. It's probably not going to do anything but be a table. Our bodies are less repetitive, so I'm doing this and you don't quite know I did that now, and then there's on this level of the psyche where we're really having the conversation. It's pretty fluid. It's pretty creative. It could go anywhere. And maybe that dynamism is the more of the potential that we can bring in, the more possibility we see.
I think it's an opening. I think truly highly creative people, their psyches are quite kind of labile. They're quite soft. Their egos. They don't have strong boundaries, and they allow the labileness of their egos allows kind of transcendent material to flow in, and it is almost as if we're connecting to something larger, something transcendent, which is a source of ideas and insight. And maybe through the process of development, maybe through the process of evolution, this opening becomes wider. The rigidness of the psyche begins to fade away. The psyche becomes softer. The boundaries of the ego become softer. So there's this kind of opening up to greater potentials, to higher potentials, if you like, from a transcendent source.
And I feel that they can apply that almost on a mundane level, whereby the ability to choose in any moment, even if it's not some great creative thing, it's just the ability to choose the right thing to do or whatever, all seems to come from choosing. What is choosing? It's the ability to see two options in the imagination and go with one of them, I guess, isn't it? And then, so that is the ability to see more options.
Yeah,
it means it feels like the more you tune into that potentiality, the creative part of the universe, rather than just the repetitive, it feels like you start seeing the level of choice you have, that you really can interact with life in such a creative way.
Yeah, well, it sort of brings us to the question of free will. I mean, as you were saying,
What's your position on free will?
Everyone seems to think it's an illusion. You know, every scientist.
I really don't think it's an
I
illusion.
don't think it's an illusion. No,
No, I
a
don't.
lot of spiritual teachers, a lot of non-duality teachers also think it's an illusion.
God, I hate that. I have to be honest with you.
I think it's just so ridiculously counterintuitive and so false. I think that free will is the product of evolution. I think the more evolved, the more conscious life forms become, the more free will they develop.
I think it's exactly that, Steve.
And I think one of the tasks in our lives as human beings is to develop more free will.
Yes.
So there are some people who maybe don't have much free will. They're the products of their conditioning, their biology.
Yep.
And then maybe they're not much more than that.
Yeah.
Everything they do is determined by biology or conditioning. But if you want to become an authentic human being, if you want to become a spiritually developed human being, you have to some degree, move beyond that, move beyond conditioning, move beyond biology even. You have to develop this capacity to choose a course of action and to mold your own behavior. So no, I think the idea that free will is an illusion is a kind of nihilistic trait of modern science, of modern materialism.
I couldn't agree with you more. So the way that I look at that, and it fits perfectly with our conversation for me, where our conversation has gone, because it seems to me there is a creative aspect to the universe, which has been there all the way along, which is why it's emergent and it's always new, and every moment's new, but we've moved in 14 billion years from hydrogen to us having this conversation. Is that creativity, which has been there all along, has itself evolved. And so the thing, exactly what you're saying, when you home into that creativity, that's now free will, because we're now conscious of it.
Yeah.
And it can throw up options in the imagination, and we can choose. And so the universe is conscious through us and chooses through us, but it can't choose through the water. It can't choose through. And then what science does, it seems to me, the great, science is just amazing in what it's achieved. But its great error, although it is reductionism, so that if you then reduce those higher levels, which are where free will exists, and say that they are really the lower levels, then what you've just done is taken from the level where there is free will to the level where there isn't. And the same with non-dual spirituality. If you think that the individual is it's really all one, rather than it is also all one, and that oneness individuates, and through the individuated individual it has free will and individual creativity, then, but if you deny that, if that's an illusion, then you've just lost the very place where the free will exists. And that's why they both feel like nihilistic to me, those two. And both of them do the same thing. It feels like any human inquiry starts from where we started. It starts from, hey Steve, you're on this strange journey, you've got your kids and what do you think it is? You've seen people die. That's where we start from. You've got a story. You find life beautiful and hard like me. What's going on? And then both of them answer those questions by just removing that and going, none of that really exists.
Yeah.
There's just, or there's just all one. It's just all consciousness, or it's all just matter. And takes away this bit in the middle where you and I are actually experiencing this.
I mean, it is obviously true on one level. Everything is one, but the fact that the fact that everything is one does not, take away the richness of your individual experience. It does not kind of deny the possibility of free will. And then the metaphor I like to use, and it's been used many times before, is like the wave on the ocean. A wave exists as an individual form, but it's also part of the whole ocean. It is one. It has oneness with the whole ocean. It is one with every other wave and the whole of the ocean.
Except these waves can go, do you know what? I'm going to go this way.
That's right.
And that's the key.
I don't really exist.
Those waves can, and they can also, and I think this is key, is you can also, and there's been big experiences for me, the non-dual insights for real, I know that, you can take your attention to the place where there is no separateness. And it's a good thing to do, but you can then bring your attention back to the place where there is.
Yeah, I mean, both are realities. Separateness and oneness exist in the same dimension.
Like the yin yang thing for me. It's like they're not.
But
contradiction.
individuality does not entail separateness. The fact that you are individual does not mean that you are separate.
Yeah, I mean,
Ideally,
yeah,
you know, you
depending
are
how
an
you see the
individual.
words.
Yeah, and then you are one with every other individual. You
Yeah.
are one with the whole of
Yeah.
life itself.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like the wave on the sea is a good example of that. Where it's
Yeah, well, the problem is that a lot of waves forget that they are one with the whole ocean, don't they? They forget that they begin to think that they are purely individual waves.
So here's
purely separate
here's the
waves.
thing that I'm getting a lot, and the more I focused on this evolutionary idea, which I know you have too, the more I want to pick us up on words like forget, because it sounds like we already knew. Now, because of the reincarnation cycle, which I actually think is a reality too, there I think forget is actually, there is some way in which we do forget. But there's also a feeling it's more like, it's not that all the waves are forgotten, it's like most of the waves haven't found out yet. That as the evolutionary current goes through, more and more waves are going, hey, I'm the whole ocean, rather than they already knew and they've kind of, because that has that kind of same negative thing that somehow we all knew and then it all went wrong kind of feeling.
Yeah, it is a traditional idea, the idea of forgetting in spirituality, the idea that you were one and you were returning to oneness. It's going back home to oneness.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe there is some truth in it, in the fact that originally, you know, I mean, in my philosophy, you know, everything was originally spirit, or I sometimes call it fundamental consciousness. So the whole universe arises from this original spirit or fundamental consciousness, because spirit has a kind of natural creativity or dynamism within it, which naturally produces creativity. So it leads to the production of matter, it leads to the evolution of consciousness and the evolution of more complex material forms.
So how do you square that? So I completely get what you're saying, and if you went back to just like 2 or 3 books for me, I'm saying exactly that. But more and more I'm not. And the reason I'm not is I've become uneasy about conflating the concept of spirit, potentiality, creativity, whatever you want to give to that formless potential, with the idea of consciousness. And I know that's a very strong old idea. Well, it's really an Indian idea, isn't it? You know, in the West, I conflated it in my work, spirit and consciousness, but you don't find that in the Western tradition, really. That's come across from Advaita Vedanta and Eastern traditions, the idea of it, or actually it's come across in the translations of those words. And the reason I feel uneasy about it is because it feels like philosophically we're in danger of slipping in things that don't belong at the beginning. Because when I actually use the word consciousness, I mean this bit of reality that I'm conscious of. And there's a whole load that I know I'm taking in, which is unconscious. And like, you know, Jung's thing, that the consciousness is like a very small part of the soul riding on this vast unconsciousness. And then suddenly we put consciousness at the beginning. And it feels like this is a dangerous thing to do.
Well, let's forget the word consciousness. Let's say spirit.
Spirit, I'm fine with. But it's key, there is a key. It's like, because it means that for me, the beginning isn't conscious. That's the point. I mean, it's going to become conscious.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there is a sort of trend in modern philosophy, like panpsychism, to say that consciousness is something fundamental. So,
see, again, I think there's a difference for me between saying subjectivity arises immediately. It's not like there's just dead matter and then, what do you know, suddenly from nowhere subjectivity arises. I can see, the way I've ended up thinking about it is that once things individuate as forms, once spirit, which is very much, I think, in line with your thought, once spirit is realizing its creativity and it becomes individuated, that individual thing, although it's part of the whole, it has a relationship with the whole as an individual, and that's subjectivity. So chemicals have got individual subjective relationships, electrochemical relationships, and that subjectivity, once it becomes biological entity, will become sentient and it will have a sentient relationship. And then once that becomes origin of psyche, that will have a conceptual relationship, so that the subjectivity and the objectivity are evolving side by side.
Yeah, I agree.
And that will become conscious, but rather than it being like, well, it was already conscious.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, with the panpsychists believe that it's a way of kind of getting around the problem of how consciousness could emerge from matter.
Yes.
I mean, the standard, standard materialistic view of consciousness is that somehow it emerged from matter when matter reached a certain level of complexity.
Yeah.
But there are all kinds of reasons why that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a magical trick. You know,
Yeah.
it's like water turning into wine. At a certain point, hey presto, you know, the magic takes place and consciousness comes into being. So panpsychism suggests that, you know, that's not a problem because consciousness was always in matter. Every atom, right from the beginning of the universe, had a certain kind of proto-consciousness, a tiny glimmer of consciousness. But that's not really my perspective anyway. My perspective is that, you know, spirit pre-existed the universe, pre-existed matter, and because of this dynamic quality within spirit, matter came into being, and matter became more and more complex.
Yeah.
And at a certain point of complexity, matter or organizations of matter became able to canalize spirit within themselves, which became our
We're able to
canalize. Or you could say channel, or you could say that, you know, they were able to transmit spirit within themselves. Maybe that's, you know, the first cellular creatures, the first amoeba. Maybe that's what happened then, that they became able to transmit spirit within their own individual beings. So they became conscious living entities. And as living beings become more complex, as they move through evolution into more and more organized forms, they develop more and more, you know, a higher ability to channel spirit within themselves. So we become more sentient, more alive, more conscious. We have more experience, and finally we develop free will towards the, you know, the higher end of evolution. So yeah, as living beings become more complex, they also become able to canalize spirit within themselves more intensely, and they become more alive. And there's a process of spiritualization, you could say. I know Teilhard de Chardin, you know, the French philosopher, he talked about spiritualization. So yeah. I think that's, you know, that's been happening since the beginning of evolution. Physical complexity moves along with increased sentience and increased consciousness.
So I think probably I'm trying to explore something very, very, very similar. And I'm happy with the word spirit. I use the word spirit just because I think of it as potentiality. The Whitehead's idea of creativity is also good. Being is good. But it's something, for me, it's like, okay, if you're going to put something before the realm of form, it's formless. Mm-hmm. And it's timeless. And so it has no form. It has nothing you can say about it. It's So it's unconscious because it's on everything. It has no form, but it's the potentiality for everything which will arise, and then that process is happening. So the way that I would tend to language it, I think, would be that spirit is, that formless potentiality is actually manifesting itself. So it's not being channeled by it. It is it. It's the other side of it. Yeah. But where I get what you're saying, because I was working with it, trying to think, okay, what's Steve getting at here? Was that what you're saying also resonates for me because of where we started the conversation, which is the more, if in this flow of time, for me, it's this time stream of realization of form from the formless and timeless potentiality, which is always both here right now, that individuating into something which is individual in relationship to the whole, so you've got object and subject, that for me will become, that is what's evolving in tandem, that will become sentience, that will become consciousness. So it hasn't come from matter, it's come from the evolving subjectivity. And what I liked about the idea of the channeling, though, is the very thing that the more that happens, the more the potentiality, the more access to the potentiality. How can I say this? The more creative the universe can be. The reason that it's exponential, the reason that now it's on this non-material level of psyche is, and it's like literally like we're having this conversation. It's utterly new. We've never said these things before. No. That's the level of creativity that happens once you reach soul. Yeah. It's not the level once you've just got basic matter. It's like that you can pretty much map out how it's going to work, and that's happening because the level of the formless potentiality to affect things is increasing, and that's where the free will comes in, which is why when you've got animate life, it has got more of what you said, spirit. It's got more creativity, so in that way it is channeling it, and I can get what you're saying. Is that kind of the intuition?
Kind of, yeah. It's an opening, it's an expansion. I think the whole of evolution can be seen as an expansion of consciousness, or maybe an expansion and an intensification of consciousness. And the interesting thing for me is that I see spiritual development as a continuation of that process.
Yeah.
I think that when we engage in spiritual practices and spiritual paths, we are in a strange way engaging in self-evolution and continuing the whole evolutionary process, because we're opening further, we're expanding consciousness further.
Yeah.
So I see spiritual awakening as an expansion and intensification of consciousness on many different levels. So there's a kind of subjective expansion where you go deeper into your own being and realize deeper levels of your own self. There's the expansion of intersubjectivity, increased connection with other people. There's an intensification of perception where the world becomes more real and more vivid and more beautiful. So there's a kind of an expansion happening on many different levels. And it is exactly the same as the whole of evolution. The whole of evolution has also been an expansion of consciousness. So that's why, it's such an interesting period that we're living in, because there are so many people engaging in spiritual practices, following spiritual paths, and they're all contributing to the process of evolution in a way which has never been done before. This whole process of, you could call it conscious evolution, which is like the spearhead of the whole evolutionary process. And it's going to be really interesting to find out where it's heading, in the next few decades and centuries.
It's an incredible idea, isn't it? That I think it was one of the Huxleys that said it first. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Was it that idea that
Julian Huxley?
Was it Julian Huxley?
Evolution.
Yeah, it was the idea that it's just such a. I mean, the idea of the whole universe evolving is massive, beyond massive, isn't it? But the idea of getting the fact that in this conversation, the universe is consciously reflecting on its own evolution and how to engage with it is a stunning idea, and that's what we're doing now.
Yeah,
And then the idea that we can choose consciously where we want that. That we are the universe now. For the whole process before has been sublime but unconscious, because that hasn't been available to it. And now we can start to, through conceptualizing it, using the imagination, we can actually consciously open up to its own depths.
Yeah, that's why, we were talking earlier about the idea of going back home and returning or forgetting. So in that sense, I think it is applicable, because we are returning back to the original source.
Yes.
Spirit is opening itself further and further inside.
I think it's exactly right, but to use the line that beautiful, the Eliot line, which is very famous, knowing it for the first time, you come back to where you started. So the underlying myth that I located in Gnosticism, which I think is not just Gnosticism, I think it's a perennial myth. But when I kind of came back, so now we're in pre-science, pre-evolution, all that. It seemed to me that the underlying myth was unconscious oneness through conscious individuality to conscious oneness, which was a both-and state, which was both individual and consciously one at the same time. And that felt like, God, that's the movement. There's a movement between, and each one of us takes that literally as we come in as a human being. We take that same journey, and that the whole universe, and then the scientific myth came along, and I started really plugging into that. This is the same journey. So in that way, it feels like, so the potentiality, whatever name, spirit, let's call it spirit, is arising as everything, individuating, exploring itself in all these different ways. And through us, it has reached the point where it's conscious, where it has the psyche, the imagination, soul, and then it can take attention, which it now has, and place it on its deep being and realize, oh, I'm this. And so that through us, it's knowing itself. So in one way, it is coming back, because it's coming back to where it's all come from. Yeah. But it's actually the end of the story, not the beginning, that it's doing that.
Yeah, that's true. I think even within our own individual lives, that's also applicable.
Yes.
With our journey from birth through childhood into adulthood, and towards death. I mean, this is something I've covered a lot in my own work, my own research. There are a number of parallels between the state of young children, the way that they perceive the world, the way that they experience reality, and the spiritually awakened state. On a basic level, there are certain parallels, like the sense of presence, intense nowness of young children, and the lack of boundary between self and the environment. So the young children feel a sense of participation, which we generally lose as adults. And also the freedom from the past and the future, freedom from psychological attachments, and so on. But as we become adults, we move out of this kind of childhood state. We develop a sense of separation. We start to live in the past and future. We pick up psychological attachments. So we lose the characteristics, the spiritual qualities of childhood. So in a sense,
So for me,
I
want to.
I know what you're going to say.
What am I going to say? Go on.
You're going to say that it's a. Well, no, you tell me what you're going to say.
See, my feeling is that's good. We should lose them. And what strikes me about kids, I mean, I can remember looking into the eyes of my little girl when they first opened, the moment they opened, and it was, and you're looking into the depths of life itself. It's like, there's the Buddha. Who doesn't look at that? It's like, wow. But she doesn't know that.
Yeah.
She's unconscious. Now, she'll come in and live in the moment, but she can only live in the moment because I'm not living in the moment. I'm busy not living in the moment.
Yeah.
So she can live in the moment. And I have to make sure everything's okay so that she can just be here now. So it feels to me like the place then, what I want to arrive at is a both and place, where I've got that quality of I can, especially, and having kids teaches you that, doesn't it? What the kids want, it feels to me, is me to be able to meet them in the moment, going, I'm right here with you, but also I'm aware of danger, I'm aware of the time, I'm aware of the...
Yeah, well, I agree completely, yeah. I mean, I think there are so many... I mean, I'm not saying that we should all return to the state of being young children.
Yeah.
That would be ridiculous.
Because adults who are in the moment are a pain in the ass, really.
Well, they can be. But, obviously, if we return to that young children, the world would be in complete chaos, We'd all be fighting over bits of food. We'd all be screaming about the most trivial things, So we don't want to do that, but... and obviously, as we become adults, we gain so many psychological benefits.
Well, look, just that thing. Let me just pick up on that for a minute, because it's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's the key, isn't it? The thing, and this is what's missing sometimes with the kind of be in the moment thing. When you see kids, and they definitely are babies, they're really in the moment, and it's either heaven or hell, isn't it? I mean, if you or I, if I had indigestion now and started shouting my head off and rolling around, I'd be like, oh, Christmas, what's happened with Tim? But that's what a baby would do, because it's not in time. Whereas if I have it, I can just go, hang on, this will pass.
Yeah, that's true.
It's going to wait for a bit. Or I stub my toe. It's like, what do you do with a kid? It'll pass. Hold on. I know it'll pass. And then it does. So there's a gain when we come out.
Yeah,
it's just that there's a loss too.
Yeah. So, I remember one of my kids saying once, he was really upset. He was about 5 years old at the time. He was really upset about something. But it was Christmas Eve. So I said, don't worry, it's Christmas Day tomorrow. And he said, but it's not Christmas now. It didn't make any difference.
Brilliant.
So I know exactly what you mean. But it's an integration. I think spiritual awakening, spiritual development is, to an extent, it is a recapturing of some of those qualities of childhood. But it's a combination. You integrate those qualities, that sense of presence, that sense of oneness with the world around you, that sense of freedom from psychological attachments, that sense of openness and curiosity and vivid perception. So you regain those qualities and you combine them with all the benefits of being an adult, with the practical abstraction, the ability to think logically, to delay gratification.
Yeah.
So the ideal is to combine both.
So you realise you don't have to lose that to have this.
Exactly.
They coexist. I can feel them both now.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people don't recapture those things. They remain in an adult state of separation.
It gets very cold and dry and black and white.
And they get to the point of midlife crisis where they realise that the life they've been living is unfulfilling, and sometimes they move towards spirituality or self-development. They move inside, or sometimes they buy material possessions, buy a sports car to try to compensate for it. But I think a lot of people do realise eventually that there is something missing, that they do feel alienated. They miss that sense of connection they had as children, and in some ways, hopefully they'll move back towards that.
I do this stuff. Do you do live? Do you work with people in terms of actual, groups of people doing stuff together? And
I do workshops. Sometimes. Yeah.
So one of the things that I experience in those that I do, which has been a big focus for me over the years, is exactly that. Everyone comes like a little child. And because again, it's all laid on. If I create a safe space, they don't have to worry about food. They've got accommodation. There's a good show, everything, and they can just and then suddenly they're like kids together, and it's a delight in being, and this natural love arises, and it's like, okay, till you have to go home, you can just remember how good it feels to be. And this natural flowing of love. And I think that's a big thing we need to do, is create those spaces where as grown-ups we can just meet in that.
Yeah, it's brilliant idea. Yeah, I do something similar in workshops. I sometimes say that I mention the parallels between spiritual awakening and the childhood state. Yeah. And I say, in a few seconds we're going to return to the state of being young children. And I say that we're going to try to recapture that kind of direct, immediate perception that young children have. Yeah. So it means sort of bypassing concepts and labels. So normally when we look at an object or we experience a phenomenon, we mentally label it straight away, unconsciously. We say that's a glass, that's a person, that's flowers, trees. And the process of mental labeling obscures the reality of the phenomenon itself. So if you can bypass that process of mental labeling and just focus directly on the object or phenomenon, then you can sort of re-experience the childhood perception. And we work through different senses. We work through touch, exploring objects, then through sight and sound and so on. And then most people are able to sort of glimpse that, that kind of direct, immediate perception again. And it's always there. We can, in theory, we should be able to switch into that mode at any moment. It's always there.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. And so the underlying idea which I use there, I think, in the philosophy is this the thing I call paralogical thinking, which is both and thinking. So rather than being just always that, is it this or is it this? And what's come out in that conversation about childhood has probably underlined everything actually, is I find it really helpful with people when I can go, it won't be that you'll just be a child. It's actually you will be both.
Yeah.
And you can be both, and you can be both. So that ability, it's because a lot of when spirituality, it's a bit like when I hear people, this constantly be in the moment thing, and people struggle with it because it's impossible and undesirable. People who live in the moment can't remember. I mean, it's an awful state to be in. Terrible. Exactly. But if it's like, well, but you can be both. You can actually have that awareness of course you're in time and there's movement and you're thinking and you want that, but also, breathing right now, meeting Steve right now. Wow, there's an immediacy to that which isn't in my vision of how we might be tomorrow, which is just not, you don't want to miss that, the life which you don't want to miss the meal because you're thinking about the meal. And that both and really seems helpful to me.
Yeah, I sometimes say to people, sometimes in my workshops or lectures, I talk about spiritual awakenings, spiritual experiences, like temporary spiritual experiences, when we feel a sense of connection with the world around us, we feel a sense of expansion, a sense of meaning and harmony, and so we become aware of deeper aspects of our own being. And I say to people, is it possible to live in this state all the time? Is it possible to live in a permanent state of spiritual awakening? And they usually say, no, because, what do you do when you need to drive your car? You can't be aware of the oneness of the universe, or you need to overtake on the motorway, or, what about when you need to pay your bills or do your job? But the point is that even if you are in a state of spiritual awakening, you don't have to be in a constant state of oneness. Sometimes you do need to focus on everyday practical matters. So you should be able to use your attention to focus on what is necessary, what needs to be done. And once it's done, you can, if you like, you can shift back into that awareness of oneness, that sense of inner bliss is always there, but you don't have to live in it. Maybe that's one of the differences between adults and children, that we do, as adults, have this capacity to focus our attention, to concentrate and to edit out, exterior phenomenon if they're not necessary.
So I had this is quite recent actually, Steve. I'm always looking at language. And I caught myself, and I was talking about becoming more conscious, as I've done forever. And I suddenly thought, what's that mean, being more conscious? Because actually, when I'm more conscious now than when I was asleep. At night I get tired, if I'm ill, I'm less conscious. It seems like it's more to do with energy. And then I thought, what I'm really talking about, it feels like it's not being more conscious, but being conscious of more. The ability to be able to put my attention in places I couldn't put them before. So that when I'm conscious of more, I can go, oh yeah, there's the formless oneness, my goodness. And then I can come back here and then go, right, we need to clear up this, and there's a fluidity and an ability to move to these places because I'm conscious. And the same when you did that lovely thing earlier where you went, the colors turn up and you're more aware of this and you're more creative in this, and it's like, I'm conscious of more things, and I can go into them and I can move around. I'm not limited to this little box. I'm constantly pushing it. And then in myself, I've learned things about Tim, his passivity, his habits that don't serve him. I see those. I'm more conscious of Tim now than I was. Thank goodness. Still feels pretty unconscious often, but and that. So
yeah. Maybe there are also, in addition to the parallels between childhood and spiritual awakening. There are some parallels between psychosis and spiritual awakening. You know, one of the symptoms of schizophrenia is very intensified perception.
Yeah.
An awareness that, or a sense that the whole world has become alive in some way, that objects become living beings.
Yeah, I'm talking to you.
Yeah, and that kind of, yeah.
I think that's really interesting, and something I wrote a little bit about in one of my, in the Mystery Experience, in Deeper Way, a few books back. I through my own personal experience, not to me personally, but people around me, close to me, I just became aware that a lot of the things I was describing as this, that I was around people who were experiencing what I was experiencing as oneness and love as terrifying depersonalization.
Yeah.
And where I was going, oh, it's good. If I can be conscious of my breath, it really helps. And they were telling me, I can't stop thinking about my breath. It's awful.
Yeah.
And so I became aware. And then more and more, it's felt like, oh, well, Jung had this insight years ago, but the a lot of things that are in the same bracket as mysticism are pathological. And in trying to understand when they were pathological and when they weren't, as a massive generalization, it felt like it was when there wasn't the both and. That when people had drifted off into this, that was that right from kind of that, what gets bypassing, as it gets called now, that kind of quite benign but common thing, right through to psychosis, or that was when, and that often, what I became aware of, and trying to spit this out, is that with some people needed to wake up to spirit, and then other people needed to come into individuality. They needed to really develop a strong ego base from which to wake up from.
I mean, for me, this kind of impinges on the whole topic of the ego and the spirit. You know, some spiritual traditions say, or spiritual teachers say, that you need to destroy the ego in order to become awakened, and that the ego is the biggest obstacle to spiritual awakening. And I think in a sense that's true, but in a sense it's also dangerously false.
Yeah.
Because the people who don't have any sense of self, the people who don't have any egos, are the psychotic people.
Yeah.
And I think in spiritual awakening, you need to have some sense of an organized identity in order to process and integrate what's happening to you. I mean, in my researches in transpersonal psychology, I found that in many cases, when people undergo a very sudden and dramatic spiritual awakening, usually caused by intense psychological turmoil, like bereavement or a diagnosis of cancer, it is often quite turbulent. The actual process of awakening can be quite disturbing and turbulent. It can even resemble psychosis in some cases. You know, because it's so dramatic, and there's a sense of new energies being released inside you, and your memory may be disturbed, your concentration may be disturbed, you may lose that sense of being able to function in the world, your capacity to interact with other human beings. So sometimes it is misdiagnosed as psychosis by unknowing psychiatrists, unfortunately. But the people who are able to negotiate that process best are the people who do have a sort of stable sense of identity.
Yeah.
They have an integrated sense of self.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the self is not an obstacle. It's actually a big benefit.
Foundation. I think.
Yeah. It's a question of harmony, isn't it? You need harmony between the self and the spirit, or
yeah,
you know,
yeah, or just levels of emergence. That it's like once you reach the point where there's an individuated soul, that's a foundation from which you can wake up to realizing that you're the whole thing, you're the universe. If you don't, then this thing becomes more and more encrusted, and then you get egotism, you get everything's about me, and that can inflation and all the rest of it. But if it's a foundation, and what intrigued me about studying the mystery experiences in the ancient world and Kabbalah and all those things was how many of them were going, well, you don't really study that level of transcendence until you're 40. Because then you're in the world, you've got a family, you've developed your separate self, you've got a set, and once you've done that, then you can, or talking to my kids, and as they're getting older and going, look, you know, my advice to you, having done everything, is don't take psychedelics too early. Because you don't want to destroy yourself, or not destroy it, but you don't want to dismantle your sense of self until you've got one. Because that will lead you to problems.
I mean, interestingly, I did a PhD on studying cases of spiritual awakening. So I studied 25 cases of spiritual awakening. I looked into a number of different factors, like the age at which it happened. In most cases, it was a sudden and dramatic spiritual awakening. And the average age was about 33. Yeah. So he wasn't too young, you know. I think in many cases, it was people who had developed a sense of self before they underwent the process of awakening.
It feels healthier. I mean, I was very young. I mean, I was 12, so it was completely different for me. But and there was a price for that. Actually, it wasn't psychosis in my sense because I had a strong sense of self. There was a price in the world.
Yeah,
I didn't belong in the world.
Yeah, but it does make it difficult to function. I mean, I struggled
what
for
happened
years.
For you? What happened for you? When was it for you?
Well, for me, it was kind of innate. At the age of 16 or 17, I started to have spiritual experiences, but I didn't know they were spiritual experiences. I thought there was something wrong with me, and I even tried to tell my parents about it, which was a big mistake.
Oh, really?
I heard my dad. I was walking upstairs one night and heard my dad say to Mum, "What's wrong with our Stephen? You know, should we take him to a doctor?" And I thought, "Oh no, I'm not going to talk to them about it anymore." So it took me a long time.
Steve, that's terrible. That must be horrible.
I know, but that was the way it was. So it took me 5 or 6 years to understand the experiences. It was only once I stumbled on spiritual books, or maybe I didn't stumble on them. Maybe I was drawn towards them.
Yeah.
And I did feel instinctively drawn to meditation and spiritual books.
Yeah.
And then, when I remember reading an anthology of mysticism. It was by F.C. Happel, it was called Mysticism, a Study and an Anthology. And I picked up this book at my local bookshop. And when I read the experience, I thought, yeah, this is the kind of experience I've been having. Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah. I thought, so I'm not crazy at all. Maybe I'm crazy, but all these other people are
crazy too.
So at least I'm not alone in my craziness.
Yeah.
So things began to make a lot more sense. I realized that, what I was having were spiritual experiences. And from that point on, I understood myself, but there were still difficulties in trying to function in the world. This sort of everyday stuff like finding a job, or talking to other people, going shopping. So I did, for a long time, I found it really difficult to function in the ordinary world, even like social interactions. I couldn't have spoken to you now like this,
Oh, really? Okay.
30, 25 years ago.
Wow.
I found it really difficult to speak, like the social rules of etiquette and conversation. I just took me a long time to learn them properly. But it was also because of the kind of lifestyle. I was living a very kind of isolated, reclusive lifestyle, a kind of monkish lifestyle. Yeah. Until I, became a musician and got involved in a kind of hedonistic lifestyle. But yeah, it does make life difficult. You have to go through this process of integration, and you have to learn how to. It's easy for other people to learn how to function in the world. It seems to be
one of the things I always noticed when I was when it's because different, but some similarities for sure. That kind of feeling of I don't belong here, was that the people who were influencing me at the time, like Ram Dass and Alan Watts, and all sorts of people. A lot of these people, they were very established in the world when they woke up. They were professors and doctors, and it didn't, it happened then. So they were established in the world, and then they woke up, and then they were established in the world in a new way. Whereas as a kid, sort of waking up not too early because it was fine, but nevertheless early. It was like, wow, this is, how do you relate to any of this? Now you see this, and I hear that.
So did you tell your parents about it?
Yeah, I did kind of, but I don't have much memory of that. My parents were quite easygoing about all this sort of stuff, really. I think they just let me be me, and it poured out into creativity in my case. And I think probably I was blessed with a strong sense of self. Because I had immense, it just filled me with confidence. I felt I could do anything, and just launched into everything I thought I could do. So so I kind of had that. Maybe I had a nice strong ego, which I'm sure was also a pain in the ass, but was also maybe a benefit as well. Yeah,
I think it took me a long time to develop an ego, or develop a sense of self, or at least an integrated, functioning sense of self. Yeah. It probably didn't really happen until my late 20s, 28, 29. That's when I felt, maybe I can live in the world after all. Maybe I can stay here and make a contribution. That was when I sort of moved beyond confusion and depression. So all the time I was having these spiritual experiences. For a long time, I did also feel quite alienated and depressed, and until I reached that point of integration.
Well, I'm very glad you did.
Me too.
So it feels like a place we should just maybe sort of bring this conversation to its fruition. It feels like, well, okay, it's a bit of a jump, but I just want to mention death, because it feels like, that's where we're heading, one way or another. And we talked about life and creativity and lots of stuff, really, didn't we? I just wondering what your thoughts are personally when you contemplate death.
Well, I've always spent a lot of time contemplating death, certainly from the age of 16, 17.
Same.
I remember being at the age of 16, becoming aware of death and thinking about suicide. You know, at any moment I'm free to commit suicide. It kind of really kind of blew my mind that I had this potential to end my existence.
There's choice.
And I became aware that death is it's follows us wherever we go every day in our lives. It's always a potential event. So on the one hand, for me, contemplating death is actually quite useful. I actually enjoy contemplating death because it makes me aware of the preciousness of the present moment, the preciousness of my life. It gives me a sense of motivation because I feel I'm only here for a certain amount of time. I could be taken away at any moment, so I have to fulfill my role. I have to make my contribution. So it gives me that sense of motivation. But at the same time, and I think this is what you believe too, or sense, I sense that death is probably not the end, that there is some kind of continuation. And I don't really know what it will be, but I do sense strongly that there is some kind of continuation. I think death is a kind of adventure. In a strange way, I'm actually looking forward to it. I don't want to die, for a good while yet, but when it comes, hopefully, I will embrace it and accept it. And, I'm sure I will go on an interesting journey. Well, what do you think?
I feel the same, Steve. It feels, the resonance which has come out as we've talked about our early years is extraordinary, because that's exactly, it's always been with me, always, every day. Plato's line, philosophy is a meditation on death, and just, it's like, that's the way it is. And the way that can either take all value away from life and leave you with nothing, or give it the ultimate value, depending on where you stand with it. And having been around death a lot and worked with the dying for a while, and it feels like death is a really significant moment, and from the way I've ended up seeing it right now is like I'm experiencing already another realm. I'm in it the whole time, this non-material realm of soul. And I think the ancient teaching is right, which is simply that dream reality that I'm in continues. And which is why what I hear from people who've had near-death experiences, which I haven't had, although I've had very similar experiences, not near-death ones, is so dreamlike, but not dreams as in something, again, not in the reductionist way in which they're nothing, in which they're irrelevant, in which they're lesser.
Yeah, maybe
but actually
a dream which is in some way more real than ordinary reality.
I think so. And I think we can touch on that now. And that seems to be what people describe, and that resonates for me. And the biggest thing that resonates from the awakening experience is this sense of the love light, the sense that there is something that same potentiality and creativity and spirit that we've been talking about the whole way through the conversation is there waiting. And the experience of death is an experience of love.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, certainly in deep states of meditation, 2 or 3 times in my life, in a really deep state of meditation, I feel as though I've touched on something timeless, something eternal, something beyond the body, which will continue when the body, not necessarily me as I appear to be now, something more essential and more fundamental. Yeah,
I guess the place I've gone is that it's actually something very you. It feels to me that it's not just like some essence, some abstract thing, but actually the very story that Steve, which is a part of a much bigger story, of which Steve is a fragment. A bit like every time you've dreamed at night, you've been a different Steve, but they're all part of this Steve. In the same way that this is a part of a soul current, which is much bigger, and Tim is also. But when my mum died, and I had a very powerful encounter with her 6 months after she died, which is not like anything I ever had. It was exactly like that. And what was nice about it, though, is it felt, although there was something much bigger than my mum, it was still my mum. It was that individuality, that particularness wasn't irrelevant, it wasn't wasted, it wasn't gone. It was just as, even more special and treasured. And all the accumulated past was there. That everything she'd been was part of what she is. And that was a beautiful.
Yeah, it's similar to the life review, which sometimes happens in near-death experiences.
Exactly, yeah.
All the significant experiences of your life, which become
you,
who you are at this moment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that there's a lot of research in science which suggests that there is a life after death. There's the evidence from reincarnation, studies of reincarnation, evidence from near-death experiences, from laboratory experiments with mediums. The sort of highest level mediums do seem to genuinely make contact with deceased people. The near-death experiences where people meet deceased relatives, sometimes they didn't even know they were dead, deceased relatives. So I think even from a scientific point of view, there is significant evidence in addition to the kind of the inner sense which we have as well.
So the place where I love what you're doing in the world, and in which I applaud and respect everything you're contributing, is that I feel like you are part of the movement which I would also like to be part of, which is bringing in a new narrative, and which can bring together science, bring together spirituality. Because if we lived in a world where this was part of the intellectual mainstream, that we understood death in that way, I think society and everything in it would just change dramatically. And so
I think so. I think one of the issues with materialism is that it creates a kind of background sense of nihilism.
Exactly.
And a sense that we're just biological machines. There's no purpose or meaning to our lives. So what are we going to do? Just have a good time, just enjoy ourselves, just buy as many things as we can, and it doesn't really matter what we do. If we abuse or exploit other people, who cares? So it creates that whole sort of sense of meaninglessness, existential vacuum, you could call it. Whereas this kind of worldview imbues life with meaning, and it gives us a kind of responsibility and a desire to be altruistic, to contribute to the world, and to evolve, to spiritually develop in our own lives, to actualize our potential.
Well, that's a beautiful line, I think, to draw this conversation to a close. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
It's been a really nice.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
To get to know your soul.
Yeah, likewise.